the President's comments live on C-SPAN.org. Here on C-SPAN, we will break away and take you live to the U.S. House. They're gaveling in for legislative work this afternoon, and several votes expected throughout the afternoon. They're taking up a bill that would exempt most private equity firms from registering with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We also expect to hear from Speaker Boehner right at the top, talking about some of the Republican accomplishments during the 113th Congress.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Once again, we come to you to ask wisdom, patience, peace, and understanding for the members of this people's house. Give them the generosity of heart and the courage of true leadership to work toward a common solution to the many issues facing our nation. As true statesmen and women, may they find the fortitude to make judgments to benefit all Americans in their time of need. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins.
Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for one-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the President has broken multiple promises to the American people. Constituents living in South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District have lost their coverage and access to doctors because of the President's health care takeover, which destroys jobs. And now citizens are seeing massive premium increases. James from Lexington says, quote, "My son got a letter from his employer informing him that his health insurance would increase $179 per month, 52% more than he is presently paying. He's a plumber, and his wife works as a home health aide. Now their dream of home ownership is highly unlikely." End of quote. Mary Cothran of Williston was tireless, promoting limited government and advocating alternatives to Obamacare. Congress should work together to replace it with reforms, such as introduced by Congressman Dr. Tom Price, which has been ignored by the media, which is failing to fulfill its First Amendment opportunities. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last month the President and CEO of FedEx Freight spoke at a conference for the National Industrial Transportation League. He warned that our nation's roads, highways, and bridges weren't equipped to handle current or future needs. The American Society of Civil Engineers reports that there are 69,000 structurally deficient bridges in this country, meaning that every second of every day, 7 cars drive on a bridge that is structurally deficient. And the $3.6 trillion will be needed by 2020 to address our aging infrastructure. Despite this, the most recent transportation bill passed by Congress spends a pathetically weak $52 billion a year on infrastructure. Companies like FedEx understand the long-term benefits of efficient transportation of people and goods. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that we will experience $336 billion in lost growth over the next 5 years due to inadequate infrastructure. I urge my colleagues to understand that a robust infrastructure investment not only creates jobs, but promotes pro-business policies that sustain and produce economic growth. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio, the Speaker, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American people work hard, and they've got a right to expect their elected representatives to do the same. House Republicans are listening. To date, the House has passed nearly 150 bills this Congress that the United States Senate has failed to act on. Many of them would help our economy and boost job creation. Nearly 150 bills passed by this House yet to be acted on by the Senate. These bills would do things like increase the supply of American energy and build the Keystone Pipeline, roll back red tape and unnecessary regulations, provide more flexibility to working families, reform and improve job training programs, protect Americans from cyber attacks, help schools to recruit and keep the best teachers, delay the individual mandate and allow the American people to keep the health care plans that they'd like, or to scrap the health care law that's wreaking havoc on our economy. Every single one of these bills has been blocked by Washington Democrats. The Senate, the President, continue to stand in the way of the people's priorities. Now we're trying to come to an agreement on the budget and on the Farm Bill, amongst other issues that are in conference. Chairman Ryan and Chairman Lucas have made serious, good-faith efforts to Senate Democrats. When will they learn to say yes to common ground? When will they start listening to the American people? Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the 250th anniversary of the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, the oldest synagogue in America. Dedicated in 1763, the Touro Synagogue has been a monument to the history of religious tolerance in Rhode Island and the legacy of religious freedom in America. Before construction even began, the design of the building was conceived as a balance between European architecture and traditional Jewish worship. This synagogue became a symbol of the freedom to worship in peace, widely promoted across our new nation in the 17th century and championed by Roger Williams. In 1790, in a letter reassuring the members of the Hebrew congregation of their right to the free exercise of religion, George Washington famously declared the values of our nation at its start, pledging that the United States would, quote, give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. This weekend, it was my honor to attend the rededication of the Touro Synagogue, which remains a testament to the enduring freedoms of our nation and the tradition of religious freedom that began in my home state and that is now deeply embedded in the American experience. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Kansas seek recognition?
For 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
On November 20th, during critical negotiations in Geneva about Tehran's nuclear program, Iran's supreme leader tweeted this disturbing statement: Israel is a sinister, unclean, rabid dog of the region. That same day, he added, the United States and Israel are a threat to the world and enemies that should be resisted. This is an Iranian regime we are dealing with. They have ignored diplomatic efforts for years, and they cannot be trusted. An interim deal might seem like good news, but it does not make our nation or our allies in the Middle East safer, especially when Iran claims the agreement is a victory over the great aggressor, the West. This rhetoric leaves me skeptical that any progress has been made, and I encourage our leaders and international partners to take the necessary measures to halt Iran's nuclear program, not only for our own security, but that of our allies and democracies around the entire world. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize a historic week. On Sunday, we celebrated Rosa Parks Day. Thursday, we observed the start of the Montgomery bus boycott. And Friday, we commemorate the 148th anniversary of the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. As we reflect on these historic events, we see how far our nation has come in advancing equality for all Americans. However, recent actions like the Supreme Court's decision to gut the Voting Rights Act remind us that we have much more work ahead. Although I dream of a day that the Voting Rights Act is unnecessary, the truth is that voter discrimination and suppression live on today as ugly legacies of our past. In the past few years, many states have introduced legislation that would restrict access to a voting booth. These discriminatory actions prove that the protections in the Voting Rights Act are still necessities in our world today. So this week, as we remember the struggles and sacrifices made to ensure basic rights for all Americans, I urge my colleagues to continue fighting to ensure no American is denied their right to vote. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the proposed Endangered Species Act for the Gunnison sagegrass and greater sagegrass will impact millions of acres in Colorado and hinder existing conservation efforts. It will put private lands off limits to most use and development, including agricultural production, without providing any compensation. It will kill jobs, devastate communities, and disrupt effective species preservation efforts currently underway. It won't, however, more effectively preserve the grouse. In my district, plans at the local level are underway to effectively preserve the species because they take into account the unique geography and environment of the region. These efforts are seeing success. Interior Department bureaucrats have yet to provide measurable species preservation goals so that state and local officials can meet them. Local conservation efforts are all too often disrupted by federal attempts to implement blanket plans. These one-size-fits-all plans create endless litigation and tie up resources that could be used for preservation. If the true goal is species preservation, then I hope Secretary Jewell will come to Colorado and see firsthand the effective work being done to preserve the sage-grouse and provide measurable species preservation goals. I yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Ask permission to address the House and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a truly outstanding doctor, loving father, and exceptional North Carolinian, Dr. David Lee Semel of Durham. Dr. Semel was raised in Greensboro before attending the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and after graduation completed medical school and an internal medicine residency at Duke University. He's now a professor of medicine and vice chair for Veterans Affairs at Duke, and he has dedicated himself wholly to our veterans in serving them across our great state of North Carolina. His influential book, of which he was co-author, The Rational Clinical Exam, is a comprehensive guide for patient exams and has become a powerful reference for tools for those in the field of medicine. Dr. Semel's enduring commitment to his family, his students, his patients, and to our veterans make him an exemplary citizen, and his passion for medicine and improving the health of others will continue to benefit our veterans and North Carolinians for years to come. Indeed, we should honor those who serve our veterans and set an example like Dr. Semel has done, and for his intelligence, compassion, and selfless dedication. We pray that he and his family will receive God's richest blessings, and we're thankful for role models like he serves in serving those who served our country.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Farmington's commitment to our veterans and the community's 5-year anniversary as Minnesota's first yellow ribbon city. When I first championed legislation to make the Minnesota National Guard's invaluable yellow ribbon reintegration program available nationwide, one of the pillars of this initiative was to increase awareness among communities and local organizations to improve relationships between veterans and their communities. Mr. Speaker, the people of Farmington understand the important role a community plays in the successful reintegration of our troops returning home. Farmington built a model yellow ribbon organization centered around relationships with neighbors, veterans organizations, and local, state, and federal leaders. Farmington rallied around the needs of area veterans and their families by hosting monthly dinners for veterans and holiday cookie walks. You can't beat that. As their Yellow Ribbon organization grew and their efforts expanded, they recognized success and shared those best practices with other inspired communities, leaving their Yellow Ribbon fingerprint across the great state of Minnesota. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not simply to recognize Farmington on this 5-year anniversary, but to thank the entire community for being a Yellow Ribbon trailblazer and demonstrating their continued commitment to our service members, veterans, and their families. As the Farmington Yellow Ribbon honors our sons and daughters in uniform, I would like to honor them, and I salute the entire community of Farmington, Minnesota, for helping with that noble cause, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
During this holiday season, it appears that all that our fellow Americans are hearing is a sense of pessimism. But I want to rise to talk about the optimism of this nation and the great strides that we've made, and particularly as it relates to our seniors. The Affordable Care Act has taken the brunt of everybody's criticism. My friends on the other side of the aisle are singing a broken record, not a Christmas carol. But it is important to note that seniors have benefited. The Affordable Care Act recognizes the financial burdens that seniors face. No group has been hit harder by soaring health care costs. But now, under the Affordable Care Act, seniors can have preventative care services without any copay, co-insurance, or deductible. Services like wellness visits, cholesterol, and others. Sing a good song. And yet, we sing a negative song to those who are lining the streets for comprehensive immigration reform. The families who have been fasting, have been suffering. Let's sing a good song of the health care and do comprehensive immigration reform. I yield back.
Time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and rise to extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, when the President picks and chooses which laws to enforce, it undermines the foundations of our democracy. Yesterday in the House Judiciary Committee, we held a hearing to examine the President's constitutional responsibility to faithfully execute the law. Our founding fathers formed the structure of our government specifically so that none of the three branches could become too powerful. If we ignore our system of checks and balances, our government will become unstable and chaotic. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this President and his administration have abused their executive power. President Obama continues to violate his constitutional duty to enforce the laws and instead chooses when and which laws to enforce. He has enforced laws and policies based on his preferences, like making changes to our immigration system, our criminal code, and his signature health care law. Mr. Speaker, neither the President nor any President should grant themselves extra constitutional authority to change laws they don't like. If the President himself does not follow the law, it sets a dangerous example. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. This holiday season, my constituents have inspired me by writing in about the importance of food aid and the SNAP program. All of us here in Congress have the luxury of knowing that we can provide our families with healthy food, but there are so many people in our country that will go this holiday without such a blessing. And sadly, most of those in dire need are children, and in fact, 70% of all households that depend on SNAP are families with children. In my district, a 16-year-old girl named Maya was hospitalized last year for issues related to malnutrition. She had struggled in school and showed signs of depression. Maya's hospitalization triggered her father to apply for SNAP benefits, and having a more reliable source of food gave Maya the energy to improve her grades and help her family. She helped her family out now by getting a part-time job. And as we debate the Farm Bill, let's remember that there are children like Maya and work together to protect SNAP.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
In the absence of consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise to extend my remarks.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor my fastest constituent, Jimmy Johnson, who recently won his 6th NASCAR Sprint Cup championship. In a remarkable display of teamwork, consistency, and a burning desire to always improve, Jimmy Johnson won 6 NASCAR championships in the last 8 years. More importantly, Jimmy is a champion off the track. Since 2006, the Jimmy Johnson Foundation has contributed more than $5 million to charity, with a special focus on improving K-12 education in North Carolina, Oklahoma, and California. In Charlotte, Jimmy is a supporter of Project Lift, a private-public partnership working to improve the graduation rate in some of Charlotte's toughest neighborhoods. Thank you, Jimmy, for using your on-track success to make a lasting impact in the lives of thousands of children. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks for 1 minute and address the House.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak about the benefits of Obamacare. Dennis Denbo, a 63-year-old constituent of mine, spoke to our local newspaper, the Press Enterprise, to share his story. Mr. Denbo, who was laid off recently from his computer sales job, went to the Covered California website and found that he and his wife, Jean, will save $300 a month on a plan comparable to what they have now. A few weeks ago, Mr. Denbo wrote to my office to tell me personally about his experience and how deeply he believes in America's ability to achieve great things. In his letter, he said, "We are Americans. We can solve whatever issues or tactical challenges that come up in the implementation of a nationwide health care solution. We can make it efficient, cost-effective, accessible, and a valuable service for all Americans." I couldn't agree more, Mr. Denbo. The benefits of Obamacare are real, and this body should be concerned with finding ways to improve access to affordable health care instead of delaying into funding. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I rise to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my...
Does the gentleman ask for unanimous consent to address the House?
I do.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Zeeland West High School's football team on winning the 2013 Division III state championship on Saturday, November 30 at Ford Field in Detroit. The Zeeland Ducks rushed for over 440 yards during the game, resulting in a 34-27 win over DeWitt. The Ducks' 13-1 record this season is a testament of the players' dedication, hard work, and self-sacrifice. In fact, the program itself has become an example of hard work and leadership. This is the Ducks' third state title since the program's inception only 9 years ago. And Mr. Speaker, I'd be remiss if I didn't also congratulate the Ducks head coach John Shalito and his coaching staff for a job well done, not only on the field but off the field with his players as he leads them. Again, congratulations to the Ducks. And we're very pleased to see this big win last Saturday. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
For 1 minute to revise and extend.
And does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to highlight the positive impact the Affordable Care Act is having in my home state of California. A woman by the name of Melanie wrote the following letter to the LA Times. My daughter and I have been without health care for 3 years following my loss of employer-provided insurance. In that period, I have paid handsomely for those times when my mother ministrations were not sufficient and I had to seek the care of a very expensive doctor. I've been waiting eagerly for Obamacare for the two of us since the law was enacted in 2010. Did I run into problems when I first tried to sign up in California? I did. Did I persevere? I did. Did I finally get through? I did. In January, I'll be able to take care of a condition I've ignored for the last 2 years, and my college-age daughter will be covered as well. Although the subsidy certainly helps, I will be paying something for coverage we haven't had for years. To those who cry foul, I say score. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have said it better. The reality is that because of Obamacare, millions of vulnerable Americans now score. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Oklahoma seeks recognition for what purpose?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week we celebrated Thanksgiving. We gathered with family and friends to thank God for His provision, His goodness, and His mercy. But for some families, this Thanksgiving was bittersweet. Such was the case for Senator Jim Inhofe's family. The Inhofes lost their son Perry in a tragic aviation accident on November 10th. Mr. Perry Inhofe, I should say Dr. Perry Inhofe, was a highly skilled surgeon associated with Central States Orthopedics in Tulsa, Oklahoma. David Long, Central States CEO, said that Dr. Inhofe was known as a very caring and compassionate physician. He was the kind of doctor who would make you feel you had his full attention and that your health was the most important thing to him. Continuing an Inhofe family tradition, Perry loved flying with his children and teaching them about flying. And from what I understand, he was a good pilot. Dr. Inhofe is survived by his wife Nancy and 2 sons, Glade and Cole. I wish to express condolences to the whole Inhofe family. I pray they will be comforted and strengthened by the fact that Perry was a believer in the living Christ, who said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Amen.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, now that the notorious problems with the ACA website, healthcare.gov, appear to be largely behind us, it's important that we cut through the partisan noise and look at some facts. One fact is that in 2 days, Sunday and Monday alone, almost 30,000 Americans have gone to healthcare.gov to sign up for health insurance. Many of these families are families with pre-existing conditions that would have no way to get health insurance other than healthcare.gov and the ACA. In my own state of Connecticut, with less than 1% of the American population, 22,000 families have signed up for health insurance. Mr. Speaker, from the President on down, we were concerned by people losing their health care plans in the rather small individual market. But it is important for the American people to understand that when they hear the word repeal, what they need to understand is that repeal means that the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, the millions of Americans who will get insurance because of the ACA will lose it. Millions of Americans will lose their newfound insurance if this word repeal ever becomes law. That is not right, and on that I think we should agree. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great pride that I rise today to honor Corporal Matthew Hampton, an outstanding citizen of our community and a true American patriot. In recognition of his service to this country, Matthew was recently awarded the 28th Palmer Veteran Appreciation Award. Following his graduation from Grundy County High School, Matthew volunteered for the United States Marine Corps and was deployed to Iraq, where he served as a Huey and Cobra helicopter crew chief and gunner. Corporal Hampton's exemplary service as a devil dog is reflected in the numerous commendations and military decorations he received, including the Naval Achievement Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, Presidential Unit Citation, and National Defense Medal. Mr. Speaker, this recognition is a testament to the heroism and dedication to duty that mark Corporal Hampton's exemplary service in the United States Marine Corps. I, along with a grateful nation, congratulate him on receiving the Palmer Veteran Award and thank him for his outstanding service to our nation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to highlight how the Affordable Care Act is already helping thousands of breast cancer survivors and those with pre-existing conditions. In late 2007, I heard those terrible words, "You have breast cancer." I underwent 7 surgeries, but in some ways, I was one of the fortunate ones because I had health insurance coverage. I've spoken to women who have foregone mammograms and even cancer treatments because the cost was simply too great to bear. Now the Affordable Care Act emphasizes prevention by making it possible for Americans to get screenings like mammograms without a copay. It also finally ends the egregious practice of denying coverage to patients with pre-existing conditions, like my South Florida constituent Carolyn Newman, a survivor who will save $7,000 a year with an affordable plan thanks to the Affordable Care Act. She could save even more by shopping on the exchange. With the Affordable Care Act making it possible for more women to access preventative services and not be denied coverage, we can work to eradicate breast cancer once and for all. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Colorado. I apologize.
The gentleman from Colorado requests unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to tell the story of the Montez family who live in my congressional district in Colorado. They live in Arvada, Colorado, and because of the Affordable Care Act, they will now be able to afford health insurance. This is a success story of the Affordable Care Act in improving access to quality, affordable health care. Both Joaquin and Rosalie Montez are employed, but neither of their employers provide coverage to their employees.
They have a daughter in college, a 13-year-old son, and a 4-year-old daughter, with rates ranging from $450 to $600 per month. Purchasing private insurance was too expensive for the Montez family, especially with 3 kids, a house payment, and a car payment. Due to a constrained budget, the only time the kids were receiving health care was when they were, quote, really, really, really sick, and always at an urgent care center. One time after their daughter got E. coli, the Montez family was stuck with a $17,000 hospital bill. Thanks to the help of a navigator, they were able to get insurance through the Affordable Care Act, which is a success for this nation. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back his time.
Thank you, sir.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition?
Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, December 13th is 9 days away. This is part of that side agreement when the CR was agreed to and the debt ceiling suspended. The budget is the statement of the House and Senate values and priorities, and that is what is to be agreed to by December 13th. One of the things we must say, Mr. Speaker, at the very minimum, is sequestration has to go. The CBO says it will cost up to 1.6 million jobs if it's allowed to stand. Conversely, it will get rid of or add 900,000 new jobs if it's gotten rid of. What sequestration has done is affected programs like Head Start, SNAP, programs of the National Institute of Health, mental health issues, just to name a few, as well as our defense industry. There's no longer any room in these budgets to accommodate all of these expenses, just to pay what we need to pay to keep these programs going. That is why we have to say sequestration has got to go. And that is why in the next 9 days you will hear more and more speak about sequestration and the fact that we must act on it. I yield back.
The lady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, for 100 consecutive days, the Safe Climate Caucus has brought to the House floor the reality and the ramifications of climate change. There is a recent report from 3 very reputable think tanks entitled The Arab Spring and Climate Change. Let me just quote from a couple of the troubling but illuminating conclusions that it comes to. In quotes, a prolonged and severe drought during the winter of 2010 in China contributed to global wheat shortages and skyrocketing bread prices in Egypt, the world's largest wheat importer, accelerating political instability. And social, economic, environmental, and climate changes in Syria eroded the social contract between citizen and government, strengthening the case for the opposition movement and irreparably damaging the legitimacy of the Assad regime. The authors conclude that global warming may not have caused the Arab Spring, but it clearly made it come earlier. The stresses climate change is imposing today on nations across the globe are harbingers of more severe consequences in the future. We have to address the reality and the ramifications of climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from California, the minority leader, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the President has put forth some conversation about the Affordable Care Act that focuses especially on women's health. I'm absolutely delighted to come to the floor to address that issue. Because of the Affordable Care Act, and I hope that every woman in America understands this, being a woman is no longer a pre-existing medical condition. As a mother of 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, I'm very excited about this. Over the break, I had the privilege of being at a meeting with some researchers on the subject of breast cancer in particular. And they spent a good deal of the time telling us what the possibilities were for with research that should be funded, and that's a budget issue on another subject, but related here, that we could remove this threat to women's health with proper research. But they took time to say that one thing that was helping women with breast cancer more than anything was the Affordable Care Act, that they would have access to care without having been discriminated against because of a pre-existing medical condition, that no longer would they have annual or lifetime limits on the health insurance that they would receive. The relief from the stress from all of that is a very healthy thing for people who have a diagnosis. So whether it is, whatever it is, whether it's mammograms, as my colleague Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz so generously shared her story with us about her experience earlier, Congresswoman DeLauro hers, and other members, the stories of their constituents. This is really very important. Moms are the hubs of families. Many of them fear this diagnosis. Many families in America have been affected by it. But with our investments in research and with the Affordable Care Act, women have reason to be very, very hopeful that this can be prevented with early detection, and not only early detection, but regular detection, and then on top of that, that if they have that feared diagnosis, they will receive the care that they deserve. And one other point I want to make about it is because we all worship at the altar of biomedical research and what it means for our country, and the thought that we could be rid of breast cancer in a handful of years. We want to make sure that every woman in America and every person in America benefits from that research. The vehicle for that is the Affordable Care Act. It stands right there with Social Security, with Medicare, with affordable, and that's the word, affordable health care for all Americans as a pillar of health and economic security for the American people. Today we focus on moms, we focus on women, and we say, thank God, no longer will being a woman be a pre-existing medical condition. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee of Rules, I call up House Resolution 429 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 77, House Resolution 429. Resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the Bill H.R. 3309 to amend Title 35 United States Code and the Leahy-Smith America Invents Act to make improvements and technical corrections and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on the Judiciary. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-28. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the Bill H.R. 1105 to amend the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 to provide a registration exemption for private equity fund advisors and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. An amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-29 shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous questions shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. 2, the further amendment printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York or her designee, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, shall be separately debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. And 3, one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Without objection.
Pending which time I yield myself as much time, such time as I may consume during consideration of this resolution. All time yielded is for the purposes of debate only.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this rule, House Resolution 429. House Resolution 429 provides a structure rule for both H.R. 3309, the Innovation Act, and H.R. 1105, the Small Business Capital Access and Job Preservation Act. The rule gives the House the opportunity to debate a variety of important amendments offered by members on both sides of the aisle. The Innovation Act seeks to address a growing problem of abusive patent litigation, commonly known as patent trolling. Patent trolls are non-practicing entities. In other words, they don't make or sell products, and they don't supply services. Instead, they exist only to secure fees from businesses that use technologies covered by the patents they own. They do this by acquiring weak patents and then filing numerous patent infringement lawsuits or sending blanket demand letters to a business. Victims of these frivolous lawsuits are all too often small businesses or startups who are ill-equipped to protect themselves. They simply don't have the resources available to mount an adequate defense. It is by definition a lose-lose scenario for them. Defendants pay millions in damages if they lose and millions in legal fees if they win. More often, defendants are forced to settle despite the merits of a case in order to avoid expensive legal costs. Meanwhile, patent trolls are aided by law firms that operate on contingency fees. This means that non-practicing entities lose their case. There's no monetary consequence to them, none at all. They aren't on the hook for legal fees like their counterparts are. As you can see, for small companies, this system is inherently unfair. Our small businesses are our most important innovators in this country. They're largely responsible for new products and services we, as consumers, enjoy. They're also a critical factor in growing our economy and creating jobs. We ought to provide fairness to them by leveling the playing field in patent litigation process. We ought to ensure that our patent system isn't stifling innovation, but encouraging it. Unfortunately, this just isn't the case right now. Patent trolling is a destructive practice that saps resources from small businesses and increases costs for consumers. And it is a negative impact, isn't limited to just the tech sector either. Patent trolling affects businesses and industries of all types, including the health industry, even grocers. It's absolutely a drag on our economy. An issue like this undoubtedly deserves to be debated by the House. This rule will ensure that a deliberative process takes place. A rule that also allows for consideration of H.R. 1105, the Small Business Capital Access and Job Preservation Act. This legislation would remove the requirement that small private equity firms register with Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. However, it would retain the option of registering if they so choose to. Under current law, small private equity firms are being grouped with behemoths, despite the fact that they played no contributing role in the financial crisis we just went through. Even the chairman of the SEC, in a letter to Chairman Henskler, admitted that the private equity funds were not an underlying cause of the recent financial crisis. Furthermore, private equity does not pose a systemic risk to the economy. So why are we taking limited resources at the SEC away from their mission and shifting them to oversee firms that pose no systemic risk at all? Why are we burdening these small companies with SEC registration? Cost, according to the Private Equity Growth Council, can exceed over $1 million per year. More money in unnecessary compliance costs means less money to invest in companies, particularly newer ones, which allow them to grow and create the jobs we desperately need. In my own state of Florida, there are over 1,000 private equity-backed companies. Let me repeat that. Over 1,000 private equity-backed companies in Florida alone. There's over 100 private equity firms within the state of Florida. These companies support more than 800,000 workers throughout the country. In fact, in 2012, Florida ranked 5th in the nation in attracting private equity investments. That investment is a vital tool for growing companies, and we are needlessly handcuffing their ability to do just that. H.R. 1105 will help these smaller funds increase the capital available for real companies so their businesses can thrive. Make no mistake, this is a jobs bill, and it will help grow our economy. I support this rule that will allow us to consider these bills, and I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will do the same. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's many things that my good friend from Florida said that I agree with. I will be discussing some of the merits of these bills. But it is worthwhile to bring forward, before discussing what these bills are not. It has been 159 days and 14 hours since the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform. This body's failure to act on immigration reform has already cost our economy nearly $6 billion. Each additional day, each day that we delay action costs $37 million in revenue, hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, failure to secure the border, failure to restore the rule of law to our country, countless families torn apart. While the Judiciary Committee has found the time to move asbestos bills, patent reform bills to the floor with ease, immigration reform remains stagnant. The Judiciary Committee has reported out 4 immigration reform bills: the Legal Workforce Act, the Agriculture Guest Workers Act, the SAFE Act, and the Skills Visa Act. It reported these 4 bills out prior to the asbestos bill, which was rushed immediately to the floor, prior to the patent bill, which was rushed to the floor after a hearing in Rules Committee yesterday. My question to the gentleman from Florida, and I'll be happy to yield for a moment, is why we're giving such treatment to asbestos and patent reform when immigration reform would create so many more jobs and reduce our deficit by so much more. I'd like to know if the gentleman from Florida has an answer to that question. I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado, but I will tell you this, that the House is moving through the Judiciary Committee at a pace to make sure that we do this right in regards to immigration. Where the Senate has rushed through a bill that is so comprehensive and so large, it'll be similar to Obamacare.
Reclaiming my time, 68 members of the Senate, including Many Republicans, including former presidential Republican nominee John McCain, supported the Senate immigration reform bill. I certainly understand the desire to get it right, but bills don't get right by themselves. These are 4 bills that have passed the Judiciary Committee. We in Rules like to make them right by allowing good, thoughtful amendments from colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I hope that next week or when we're back, we'll be able to move forward the immigration bills with the same alacrity that we've moved forward asbestos and patent reform.
I hope the same thing happens, that as these bills move through Judiciary, that we do see them in the Rules Committee and that they ultimately come to this floor for debate.
Reclaiming my time. I thank the gentleman from Florida. Mr. Speaker, I do support underlying bills that are contained under this rule. I support H.R. 1105, the Bipartisan Small Business Capital Access and Job Preservation Act. It exempts private equity funds, which are very lightly leveraged, invest in helping to grow companies and jobs, from costly and unnecessary SEC registration and reporting requirements, like venture capital firms that are already exempted and substantially have very similar business models to private equity firms. These registration requirements are an impediment to business and an impediment to job growth and have nothing to do with creating systemic risk in our economy. Importantly, this bill would only exempt private equity firms with low debt-to-equity ratios, leverage at a ratio of less than 2 to 1. Once you get talking about much higher debt-to-equity ratios, there's potentially systemic risk if you're talking about funds in the multi-billions of dollars that are highly leveraged. It's still hard to see how that could happen. It had nothing to do with the financial meltdown of 08-09. But in this case, we are being extremely safe in saying if they're leveraged 2 to 1, they are no systemic risk to the economy. My state and my district know firsthand the benefits that private equity provides to employees, to companies, to investors, including pensions, and our economy. There's nearly 500 private equity-backed companies headquartered in Colorado, many more that operate with employees, more than 124,000 workers in Colorado facilities. In 2012, there were 67 private equity investments in Colorado, totaling over $26 billion that was brought to our state because of this investment mechanism, placing Colorado third in the states receiving the most private equity investment. The underlying rule also makes an order H.R. 3309, the Innovation Act, which I also support in 2011, patent assertion entities, some of whom are bad actors, which are sometimes referred to as patent trolls, who often produce little or nothing and derive their revenue from litigation and licensing, cause significant overhang to other businesses and to consumers, for whom many of these costs are passed along in the products or services that we all enjoy. The majority of the targets of patent trolls were startups, hospitals, restaurants, retailers, hotels, and other important job creation engines in our economy. The reforms made in the America Invents Act, enacted 2 years ago, went a little ways in this regard, but did not do much to halt or put a stop to or reduce patent troll litigation or improve the quality of patents. In the case of software patents, growing patent backlogs, lack of training and resources available to PTO examiners, and ambiguities regarding patentability standards have led to approval of low-quality software patents that have not even stood up when brought to litigation. Now, thankfully, the momentum is growing to address patent reform. And I want to be clear, and I discussed this with Chairman Goodlatte in Rules Committee yesterday, this bill is not patent reform, and I believe the gentleman, Mr. Goodlatte, agrees this is not patent reform. It may be a few steps in the right direction. It may be a good start. It doesn't fundamentally create an intellectual property protection system for the digital era and the 21st century. It continues to put, constructively, Band-Aids on a 1913 system, which I do believe it is high time to rethink. I look forward to an upcoming symposium in my district at the University of Colorado this Friday that we'll be having on sort of blue-skying intellectual property protection mechanisms for the 21st century and the digital economy to encourage growth and to protect inventors. This bill does not do that. However, it is a step forward in many regards. And while I strongly support many of these patent system improvements, it won't fix our patent system. Patent trolls have targeted every form of business, and it should come as no surprise that the Innovation Act enjoys support from members from both sides of the aisle. from companies, from academics. I submitted a letter into the record yesterday from 67 professors at law universities who practice in IP from a broad ideological perspective into the record in our Rules Committee yesterday, expressing their support for this bill. And this bill maintains protections for inventors' rights to enforce their patent claims. Specifically, this bill allocates the burden of patent litigation more fairly. It includes a provision that restores financial accountability to the patent system by making it easier for courts to impose sanctions on anyone who brings a frivolous patent suit. The bill also requires the disclosure of critical details when a patent holder files a suit, such as what patents and claims are even infringed, so the person or entity receiving the letter can even know what is being discussed, so defendants don't need to guess the nature of the allegations against them. The underlying legislation further requires patent holders to disclose additional information to the PTO, the court, and the accused infringer, including the patent ownership, who owns the patent, and parties with financial interest in the patent. These provisions will help stop patent trolls who engage in illegitimate litigation campaigns and extortion against startups and small businesses. While I strongly support these patent reforms that are a modest step towards improving our patent system, the litigation reforms alone don't have enough to benefit startups and small companies that are targeted by patent trolls who send pre-litigation demand letters. I'm very appreciative of the Chairman's effort to allow, and the Rules Committee's effort to allow for the discussion of my amendment along with Mr. Chaffetz, Mr. Connolly, and Mr. Marino, who have been working in this regard to see stronger language on the issue of pre-litigation demand letters, and I'm grateful that we have made an amendment to increase accountability in the demand letter process. We'll be discussing that amendment in a more thorough basis shortly, but in brief, the problem is that before a patent troll even files a suit, it typically sends a demand letter or many demand letters demanding some form of payment. Under current law, the sender does not even have to disclose even the most basic information. As such, entities often hide behind numerous shell corporations or send vague or overbroad letters that don't even identify the owner of the patent or the basis of their legal claim, essentially leading particularly small companies to have to hire lawyers or attorneys at great expense. When you have a company that's a $300,000 a year company, a $500,000 a year company, and you receive one or more of these notices, you can imagine how that takes away from your growth, your margins, your ability to hire more people, if you have to retain professional counsel to even understand what is being alleged that your company did. Importantly, the underlying bill requires patent holders seeking to bring willful infringement claims to provide their targets with a minimum level of disclosure information, and the amendment enhances that and builds upon the language and would mandate that demand letters include information identifying the parent entity of the claimant. This language will help ensure that patent trolls can no longer hide under shell companies to conceal their true identity and their legitimacy from the demand letter recipient. I look forward to discussing these bills further, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, first I want to respond to my good friend from Colorado, and I appreciate that he appreciates the approach that this House is taking, particularly as it relates to both of the bills that are the underlying aspect of this rule. It is about moving in a deliberate manner to make sure that we get it right. And I thank Mr. Polis for pointing that out. And with that, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. I rise in strong support of the rule and the underlying legislation, particularly H.R. 3309, the Innovation Act. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I have seen firsthand the diligent and deliberative effort put forth by Chairman Goodlatte and the rest of the committee to bring forth to this body a pro-business, pro-growth, pro-liberty bill to reform our patent laws. And as my friend from Colorado stated, there is more that can be done, but this is a very positive step. I agree with him, and I appreciate that support. The committee vote speaks for that as well when it was 33-5 reported out of committee on final passage. In the time that I have been yielded, I'd like to also talk about a misconception that some in the higher education community seem to have about a fee-shifting provision in this bill. Despite the claims of some, the bill language protects plaintiffs who bring a reasonable and good faith case and who do not engage in litigation misconduct. In fact, even if a plaintiff's case is rejected by a court, the plaintiff is still immune from a fee award if his case had reasonable basis in both law and fact. I'm a strong supporter of our universities and the incredible research they are doing, and I believe our patent law should protect them just as they should protect the small businesses and startups that rely on our world-class patent system. The ability to enforce one's patent in court is essential to preserving the value of the patent and its inherent value to the right to the patent holder. Nothing in the Innovation Act changes this. Ensuring fair and equitable access to our courts isn't done so at the expense of universities, but at the benefit of all patent holders. As we move forward toward general debate and the consideration of amendments made in order by this rule, I urge my colleagues to be very cautious in supporting amendments that would gut or upset the careful balance achieved by this bill. Many sections in the H.R. 3309 are intertwined, and the result is a package of reforms that collectively will help American businesses and job creators, both large and small, combat a business model designed solely to benefit from exploitation of our patent system. And make no mistake, this isn't just a Silicon Valley problem. In my home state of Georgia, I hear from hotels, retailers, startups alike on economically devastating impact that vague demand letters and the threat of costly, frivolous litigation has the ability to do their businesses. End users are often attacked and often threatened with vague demand letters for infringement of an unidentified patent in a product they previously bought in the store. This is why the customer protection in Section 5 of the bill are so important and should not be weakened or eliminated. As a strong conservative, I believe our government shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers in the marketplace. Innovation thrives when government takes a hands-off approach, but there are times when Congress must step in to ensure our laws operate as they were intended. And this is exactly why we need H.R. 3309. I urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying bills, and I also ask that each carefully consider any amendment that would weaken or compromise the provisions of 3309, and particularly Section 5. But I will say this before I leave, because I have come and spoke on many bills, and my dear friend from Colorado continues to bring up immigration. And I just want to remind the Chair and the Speaker at this point that there was a time a few years ago, in which there was a golden era in which his party controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and immigration just didn't make the choice.
Recognized for 30
Thank you,
seconds.
Chair. And there was just choices made. And there were plenty of choices you made, and even to this day, one that we're talking about, the health care legislation. One of those choices, from your point of view, sadly was not taken, and that was immigration. Today we're dealing with bills we both agree on, but let's not forget the fact that when you had a chance, you didn't do it. With that, I yield back.
Members are advised to direct their remarks to the Chair and not to individual members. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Colorado.
And I certainly wish that we had acted on immigration reform. We did pass in this body under Democratic